Ukraine just crippled the refinery, keeping Russia's war machine fueled. I want you to understand something about fuel before I tell you what Ukraine just hit. Crude oil does not move tanks. It does not power trucks. It does not keep fighter aircraft in the sky. And it does not deliver ammunition to the front. Crude oil is only potential. Before a modern army can use it, that oil has to pass through a refinery. It has to be heated, separated, treated, blended, tested, stored, and loaded into the distribution network as diesel, gasoline, aviation fuel, lubricants, and other products that machines can actually burn. That distinction is not technical trivia. It is the reason an oil-producing country can possess enormous reserves beneath the ground and still face a fuel crisis above it. Russia has oil. What Ukraine is attacking is Russia's ability to turn that oil into movement. On the night of August 11th, Ukrainian forces struck the Orsk Matters refinery in Russia's Orenburg region. The facility is nearly 1,900 kilometers east of Ukrainian-held territory, close to the border with Kazakhstan. A fire was recorded after the attack. Within hours, industry sources reported that the refinery had stopped processing crude. Orsk is not Russia's largest refinery. That is precisely why it would be easy to misunderstand what happened. A strike does not have to eliminate the largest facility in the system to expose the weakness of the entire system. It has to hit the right facility at the right moment, when the rest of the network is already under pressure and when replacing the lost production creates new costs everywhere else. The Orsk refinery can process roughly 5.8 to 6 million metric tons of crude oil per year, approximately 115,000 barrels per day. It produces motor, gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel, fuel oil, bitumen, and other petroleum products. In 2024, it processed about 4.2 million tons of crude. Those numbers matter, but not for the reason most headlines will give you. The important fact is not simply how many barrels Orsk can process. The important fact is where the refinery is located, what markets and transport networks depend on it, how difficult damaged refining equipment can be to replace under sanctions, and what happens when its production has to be substituted from hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. The refinery is currently shut down. The extent of the damage is still being assessed publicly. We should be precise about that. A shutdown does not automatically mean the entire facility has been destroyed, and early wartime claims are often incomplete. But a refinery does not need to be flattened to become unavailable. Damage to a small number of critical processing units, power systems, control equipment, pumps, compressors, or connecting pipelines can stop production across a much larger share of the plant. That is what makes refineries different from ordinary warehouses. A warehouse is a building containing things. Destroy one section, and the remaining goods may still be moved. A refinery is a chain of interdependent processes. Crude enters one end. Finished fuels leave the other. If one indispensable link in the middle stops working, equipment that survives elsewhere in the facility can be left idle because the material can no longer move safely through the sequence. Ukraine did not merely set fire to an industrial site. It forced one part of Russia's fuel conversion system to stop. Stay with me, because by the time we examine what a refinery actually does, why repair is more difficult than Moscow wants its population to believe, how one regional outage moves through a continental transport network, and why Ukraine is striking facilities farther and farther from the front, you will understand why Orsk is not an isolated fire. It is a warning about the machinery behind Russia's war. Let us establish what Orsk Matters actually represents. The refinery sits in Orsk, the second largest city in the Orenburg region and an important industrial center in the southern Urals. This is not a frontline location. It is not near Belgorod, Kursk, Rostov, or occupied Crimea. It lies deep inside a part of Russia that, for most of this war, could reasonably have been treated as strategic depth. Territory where industry operated, workers arrived for their shifts, rail networks moved cargo, and military planners assumed distance provided protection. That assumption is now under attack. At approximately 115,000 barrels of crude processing capacity per day, Orsk is a mid-sized refinery by Russian standards. But 115,000 barrels per day is not a small physical flow. It represents thousands of tons of material arriving, being transformed, and leaving the plant every day under normal operations. The output does not remain at the refinery. It moves into storage depots, tanker trucks, rail cars, commercial fuel stations, airports, construction fleets, farms, factories, and government supply systems. Some of that output supports civilian life. Some supports industry. Some may enter distribution chains that ultimately sustain state and military activity. Public reporting does not provide a complete military allocation for Orsk. But in wartime, the distinction between civilian and military fuel networks is not absolute. A truck carrying food to a garrison, a locomotive moving armored vehicles, and a factory producing components all depend on energy and transport. This is why fuel is not just another commodity in war. Fuel is stored mobility. Every military operation is a decision to consume that mobility. Moving one tank consumes fuel. Moving the fuel truck that supports the tank consumes more fuel. Transporting ammunition to the unit consumes fuel again. Recovering a damaged vehicle, bringing replacement parts, rotating personnel, building defensive positions, powering generators, and maintaining air defense sites all add demand to the same logistical equation. An army can reduce food quality for a time. It can postpone maintenance. It can ration spare parts. But when usable fuel stops arriving, movement becomes a choice commanders must make carefully. Which unit receives enough to maneuver? Which convoy moves tonight? Which training activity is canceled? Which civilian customer waits so that a state priority can be supplied? The loss of one refinery does not mean the Russian army suddenly stops. Russia remains one of the world's largest oil producers and possesses a broad refining network. That needs to be said clearly. Moscow can redirect products, draw from inventories, alter regional supply patterns, increase output elsewhere where spare capacity exists, prioritize state users, and use rail to move fuel across long distances. But every one of those responses has a cost. Fuel produced somewhere else must travel farther. Rail tank cars assigned to replacement deliveries cannot simultaneously perform another job. Storage stocks used today must be replenished later. Increased output at another refinery raises stress on equipment already operating under wartime conditions. Prioritizing military or emergency demand means reducing supply to someone else. And when multiple refineries are damaged over time, the system loses flexibility precisely when it needs flexibility most. This is the strategic logic behind Ukraine's refinery campaign. Ukraine is not required to destroy Russia's entire oil industry. It does not have to eliminate every barrel of production. It has to force Russia to spend more money, use more transport capacity, accept more shortages, guard more territory, and make harder choices about where the remaining fuel goes. The weapon is not only the explosion. The weapon is inefficiency. Now consider what it means to shut down a refinery. From a distance, a refinery looks like a collection of towers, tanks, pipes, and flames. In reality, it is a chain of heat, pressure, catalysts, electricity, pumps, compressors, sensors, and carefully controlled flows. Crude has to be separated, converted, and treated into fuels meeting strict performance and safety standards. Because the material is volatile and the units depend on one another, even localized damage can require a much wider emergency shutdown. The first priority after an attack is not restarting production. It is preventing a second disaster. Operators must isolate damaged sections, extinguish fires, inspect pipelines, test electrical systems, and determine whether heat or blast effects spread beyond the obvious impact point. Standing towers do not prove a refinery is operational. The decisive damage may be inside a processing unit or at a connection linking several stages of production. And repair is not simply a matter of welding a patch over a hole. Russia has the engineers, industrial experience, and technical base to repair significant energy infrastructure. Underestimating that capacity would be a mistake. Russian industry has restored facilities after previous attacks, sometimes faster than outside observers expected. But the question is not whether Russia can repair something eventually. The military question is how long capacity remains unavailable, how much replacement equipment is required, what other projects must be delayed, and whether Ukraine can strike the facility or another part of the network again before full recovery. Time is the real damage. If a plant loses days, distributors draw on stocks. If it loses weeks, replacement supply must be organized. If it loses months, transport patterns change. Contracts are rewritten. Maintenance schedules at other refineries are postponed, and temporary measures begin to create permanent strain. Sanctions make that problem more complicated. Over decades, Russian refineries were modernized using a mixture of domestic and foreign technology. Some specialized components, control systems, compressors, catalysts, and process equipment were produced or supported by Western companies. Russia has worked to substitute domestic alternatives and obtain equipment through third countries. It can improvise. It can reverse engineer. It can cannibalize parts from other systems. But substitution is not the same as immediate replacement. An industrial component has to fit the plant's design. It has to tolerate specific pressure, heat, corrosion, and chemical conditions. A replacement may require new engineering work, new connections, revised software, or additional testing. If the original supplier no longer provides direct support, every stage becomes slower and less predictable. This is where a drone costing a tiny fraction of a processing unit can create an asymmetric problem. Ukraine spends to reach the target once. Russia has to defend the facility every night, assess damage, source equipment, pay workers, rearrange transport, replace lost production, and then protect the repaired plant from the next attack. The economics favor the attacker even when the physical destruction is incomplete. Now let us look at distance, because the location of Orsk may be as important as the refinery itself. Nearly 1,900 kilometers separated the target from Ukrainian-held territory. The precise launch location and route of the weapons used in the attack have not been publicly established in reliable detail. We should not invent them. But the confirmed outcome demonstrates something Russia cannot ignore. Depth alone did not keep the refinery operating. For most of military history, distance was protection. Every additional kilometer increased the difficulty of attack. Aircraft required bases and fuel. Missiles required range and cost. A defender could concentrate protection around the front and assume that industrial sites far behind it faced a much lower level of danger. Long-range drones are changing that calculation. They are slower and generally carry smaller warheads than cruise or ballistic missiles. They may be vulnerable to detection, electronic warfare, aircraft, and ground fire. Many can be intercepted. But they can also be produced and launched in numbers, fly complex routes, approach from unexpected directions, and force a defender to protect an enormous map. Russia does not have to defend one refinery. It has to consider refineries, depots, pumping stations, power facilities, ports, factories, airfields, and ammunition storage sites distributed across the largest country on Earth. That is a geometry problem no air defense force can solve perfectly. An interceptor placed near Orsk is an interceptor not placed near Moscow, a bomber base, a weapons factory, or the front. A radar crew assigned to watch one direction creates no guarantee that the next wave will come from that direction. Mobile teams can be moved. Electronic warfare can be strengthened. Barriers can be erected around individual units. But every defensive adjustment consumes equipment and personnel, while Ukraine retains the ability to choose another target. Ukraine does not need every drone to arrive. It needs enough uncertainty to force Russia to behave as though every important facility might be next. This is the second effect of the Orsk strike. The first is lost refining capacity. The second is the expansion of territory Moscow must actively defend. And the third effect is what happens to the transport system when local production disappears. Russia is vast. That scale gives it resources and strategic depth, but it also creates distance between production and consumption. When a regional refinery stops, replacement fuel does not teleport into the market. It has to be moved from a different plant or released from storage. The principal options are rail, road, pipeline movements where suitable, and adjustments between regional distribution hubs. Rail is powerful, but it is not unlimited. Tank cars, locomotives, crews, loading terminals, unloading facilities, and track capacity all have schedules. Russia's rail system is also carrying coal, metals, grain, civilian goods, military equipment, ammunition, vehicles, and personnel. Adding replacement fuel movements does not necessarily stop those flows, but it creates competition for capacity. Road transport offers flexibility, but tanker trucks consume the same fuel they deliver. The farther they travel, the more drivers, vehicles, maintenance, and diesel are required per usable ton delivered. Long-distance substitution raises the cost of the product even before it reaches a filling station. That is how an attack on an industrial plant becomes a price increase hundreds of kilometers away. Recent reporting on Russia's trucking industry describes precisely this broader pressure. Fuel prices have risen sharply in affected markets. Freight rates have increased. Some transport companies have reduced long-haul operations or concentrated on shorter, more profitable routes. In certain regions, shortages and delivery delays have become more visible. Demand has shifted toward rail and maritime transport, adding pressure to those networks as well. This does not mean the Orsk attack alone caused every one of those problems. It did not. Fuel markets respond to refinery outages, seasonal demand, maintenance, regulation, export policy, transportation constraints, and the cumulative effects of repeated strikes. The correct conclusion is not that one drone attack created a national crisis overnight. The correct conclusion is that Orsk landed inside a system already absorbing multiple shocks. That distinction matters. A healthy network can lose one facility and compensate. A stressed network can compensate too, but at greater cost. A network repeatedly losing plants, postponing maintenance, rerouting supply, protecting infrastructure, and managing regional shortages becomes progressively less efficient. Each new outage removes another margin of safety. This is why cumulative campaigns are more important than spectacular single attacks. Ukraine has struck energy facilities across a widening area of Russia. Refineries and oil infrastructure around Moscow, Saratov, Ryazan, Perm, Tyumen, Omsk, and other regions have faced attacks or disruptions. The individual results differ. Some fires were extinguished quickly. Some units resumed operation. Others remained offline longer. Not every claimed strike produced strategically meaningful damage, but taken together, they reveal a deliberate target category. Ukraine is attacking the conversion and distribution layers of Russia's energy system, the places where crude becomes fuel, where fuel is stored, and where it enters transportation networks. Those layers are generally more complex and less easily substituted than a single storage tank full of crude. Burning stored product creates an immediate loss. Damaging the machinery that produces the next shipment creates a continuing loss. This is the difference between attacking inventory and attacking capacity. The Orsk strike belongs to the second category. Now we can examine what this means for Russia's war machine without overstating the evidence. There is no public basis to claim that every liter produced at Orsk was destined for the battlefield. There is also no basis to claim that Russian frontline units will immediately run out of fuel because this refinery stopped. Russia can prioritize military supply, and it almost certainly will. Armies receive fuel through layered depots and planned distribution, not directly from a refinery gate to a tank at the front. But prioritization does not make the shortage disappear. It transfers the cost. If military demand is protected, civilian users, commercial transport, agriculture, construction, or regional industry may absorb more of the disruption. If civilian stability is protected, state inventories or military distribution may have to work harder. If replacement fuel is shipped from another refinery, the railway and road networks absorb the burden. If another plant increases output, its maintenance and equipment absorb the burden. Somebody pays for the lost capacity. That is the strategic value of the campaign. Ukraine is forcing the Kremlin to distribute pain across systems Moscow would prefer to keep separate. The war can no longer be funded and supplied in one compartment, while civilian economic life continues untouched in another. Higher diesel prices raise the cost of moving food. Higher freight rates raise the cost of factory inputs. Longer delivery times reduce inventory reliability. When carriers avoid long routes, remote regions become more expensive to supply. When rail demand rises, other cargo waits. When the government intervenes to cap prices, prioritize users, restrict exports, or release reserves, it spends financial and political capital. None of these effects looks like a tank exploding on camera. But wars are not sustained by images. They are sustained by systems. Ukraine's strategy appears designed to make those systems less reliable. The timing matters as well. Refinery networks do not operate in a static environment. Demand changes with harvest cycles, civilian travel, industrial activity, military operations, weather, and maintenance schedules. Facilities normally shut individual units for planned work. Other plants and inventories are expected to cover the gap. An unplanned outage during a period of existing strain is more damaging than the same outage in a period of abundant spare capacity. Russia can postpone maintenance to keep other refineries operating, but that is borrowing capacity from the future. It can restrict exports to protect domestic supply, but every barrel kept at home is a barrel not sold abroad. It can subsidize transport and prices, but subsidies convert an industrial problem into a budget problem. Again, the pressure moves. It does not vanish. This is the arithmetic Ukraine is trying to impose. Not one dramatic knockout, but thousands of additional kilometers traveled, more tank cars assigned, more air defense crews deployed, more equipment sourced through indirect channels, more maintenance delayed, more money spent keeping fuel affordable, more uncertainty for every operator deciding whether the next shipment will arrive on time. The refinery campaign also exposes a deeper contradiction in Russia's wartime position. Russia's size has always been one of its greatest strategic strengths. It gives the country resources, depth, multiple industrial regions, and the ability to relocate or disperse activity. An enemy cannot easily reach everything. But size also creates a vast infrastructure burden. Pipelines must cross long distances. Railways must connect widely separated regions. Refineries must serve local markets. Air defenses must choose what to protect. Ukraine is attempting to turn strategic depth into defensive overstretch. The farther its drones can reach, the larger the protected zone Russia must create. The more targets Russia protects, the thinner its defenses become elsewhere. The more production Russia centralizes behind strong defenses, the more transport capacity it needs to distribute the output. The more it disperses production, the more individual sites it must defend. There is no perfect answer. Russia can adapt. It can improve detection, deploy mobile fire teams, harden control rooms, disperse critical spares, and strike Ukrainian drone infrastructure. We should expect those responses. But adaptation has a price, and it takes time. Ukraine's advantage lies in choosing the timing and location of the next test. Russia may close the vulnerability revealed at Orsk. Ukraine does not have to return to Orsk. It can search for the next refinery unit, pumping station, storage hub, or transport junction where one successful penetration creates the greatest downstream disruption. Russia must defend the network. Ukraine only has to find a weak point in it. That is why the phrase war machine matters here. A machine is not one object. It is a collection of parts whose value comes from working together. Oil wells, pipelines, refineries, depots, railways, trucks, repair facilities, air defense systems, financial subsidies, and workers form one connected mechanism. Damage can be absorbed, but only by transferring work to the parts that remain. Do that once, and the machine adjusts. Do it repeatedly, and the machine becomes slower, more expensive, and more fragile. The Orsk refinery is one part. It is not the whole Russian fuel system, and its shutdown will not decide the war by itself. Claims that Russia is about to run out of fuel would go beyond the available evidence. But dismissing the strike because Russia owns other refineries would miss the strategic point just as completely. The question is not whether Russia has another refinery. The question is how far away that refinery is, how much spare capacity it possesses, whether it has its own maintenance requirements, how the replacement fuel will move, what that transport displaces, what it costs, and whether that facility will remain untouched. That is the chain Ukraine is attacking. The Russian government has also presented the war as controlled, distant, and compatible with normal national life. Every long-range strike weakens that narrative. When a refinery nearly 1,900 kilometers from Ukrainian-held territory stops processing, workers and drivers experience the war not as a battlefield report, but as smoke, a price increase, or a delayed delivery. That will not automatically produce political change, but it raises the cost of claiming the war brings no serious consequences at home. The symbolism is not that Ukraine reached one refinery. The symbolism is that Russia can no longer identify a comfortable distance and call everything beyond it safe. Here is the assessment I want you to take from this attack. Ukraine has not destroyed Russia's ability to wage war. It has not eliminated Russian fuel production, and it has not created an instant nationwide shortage through one strike. Russia will reroute supplies. It will use reserves. It will repair what can be repaired. It will prioritize the military and attempt to conceal the true scale of disruption. But every one of those actions confirms the same underlying fact. The strike imposed a problem Russia did not choose. The refinery is shut. Replacement production has to come from somewhere. Replacement equipment may have to come through a sanctions-constrained supply chain. Replacement fuel has to travel farther. Additional infrastructure has to be defended. And every day the facility remains unavailable adds another small cost to the system supporting the war. That is what successful strategic interdiction looks like. It does not always produce a spectacular crater. It changes schedules. It changes routes. It changes prices. It forces the enemy to use reserves, delay maintenance, assign escorts, move air defenses, and choose which customer receives less. The fire is only the visible part. The real damage moves outward through the network. Let me leave you with something simple. Russia built its power on the assumption that oil beneath the ground could be converted into money, mobility, and military force without interruption. The wells supplied the pipelines. The pipelines supplied the refineries. The refineries supplied the trucks, aircraft, factories, and cities. Distance protected the machinery, and the machinery kept the war moving. Ukraine is now attacking the conversion point between resource and power. Not the oil beneath Russia, the ability to use it. At Orsk, nearly 1,900 kilometers from Ukrainian-held territory, a refinery capable of processing roughly 6 million tons of crude per year stopped. Russia still possesses the crude. It still possesses the pipelines. It still possesses other refineries. But for every day Orsk remains offline, one part of the system no longer performs the job it was built to perform. Other parts must work harder. Fuel must move farther. Defenses must spread wider. Repairs must navigate sanctions. Consumers, transport companies, industry, or the state must absorb the difference. Ukraine did not need to destroy every refinery in Russia. It needed to demonstrate that none of them can be treated as permanently beyond reach. That is what happened at Orsk. The target was a refinery. The objective was Russia's confidence and distance. And the consequence is a war machine that now has to spend more of its strength simply keeping itself fueled. The smoke may disappear from the sky above Orsk. The fire may be extinguished. Russian officials may announce that supply is stable, that repair teams are working, and that the situation is under control. But the transport schedules will record the detours. The balance sheets will record the cost. The maintenance plans will record the strain. The air defense map will record another site that can no longer be ignored. Ukraine just crippled a refinery. What it is really targeting is the system that turns Russian oil into Russian military power. And that system is now being forced to fight for every kilometer, every shipment, and every day of uninterrupted operation. Stay with us. There is more to come.